So today, it's interesting. We're looking beyond just a big movie. We're digging into the very specific recipe, you could say, for telling a really unique kind of story.
Yeah, the kind where intense acting meets profound personal faith. Our subject is Jim Caviezel, and specifically his role as Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. Now, the film itself, talked about endlessly, right? But our focus today, based on the narrative blueprint we analyzed, is way more specific. We're sort of deconstructing the absolute must-haves, the required scenes, the emotional journey, the specific proof points needed to tell this story, how playing Jesus fundamentally affected his personal faith. So it's not just about making a movie. It's about like engineering a narrative about spiritual change. Okay, let's unpack this a bit.
Right. And framing it like that is really useful, I think, for you listening because it shows let's say, the deliberate mechanics behind telling a spiritual story when the whole point is to make the audience believe in a real internal shift. Not just someone acting like they had one. Well, you've got to merge things. You merge the actor's really tough professional experience, the grueling stuff, with their actual verifiable, inner life. It becomes about creating this proof of piety almost. But under the incredibly harsh lights of a massive film set, we're really looking at the design specs for like ultimate emotional authenticity here.
And the bar is set incredibly high right from the get-go. The core demand for this story, it must be emotional, spiritual, and deeply moving. That's a huge ask. It tells you straight away this can't just be a list of events, or some fun behind-the-scenes facts. No, the narrative has to hit a frequency that's just something genuinely transcendent happened during filming.
Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating there is the goal is clearly transformation, not just information. It's not documentary in the usual sense. If the aim was just, say, a documentary about making the film, you'd focus on cameras, schedules, maybe budget stuff.
Right, the technical side.
Exactly. But by demanding it be deeply moving and spiritual, the focus completely shifts. The story isn't just about what Caviezel did on set. It has to be about how the role changed him. The whole narrative structure needs to convey that this experience went beyond just acting, that it became this profound, personal, spiritual journey.
And the desire, that need to prove transformation, means the story has to get really specific. It can't stay abstract. It needs to show us concrete, almost undeniable proof of, suffering and dedication. And this is where we get into those very specific instructions about visuals and sound, the actual building blocks required to prove the struggle was real.
Yeah, the blueprint itself.
Yeah, exactly. The blueprint lays out required descriptions of visual scenes, things that communicate the physical and spiritual reality of taking on that role. The first one's kind of obvious, but it's essential. Detailing scenes like him carrying the cross. That immediately grounds the story in the sheer physical weight, the burden, the commitment involved. It tells the audience straight up, this role was agony.
Yeah, and if you connect that to the bigger picture, these required bits, they're designed to show the commitment went way beyond just what the camera captured for the final movie. It's not enough to just describe the scenes that made the final cut. The narrative specifically has to highlight the external challenges during production, too. Like, for instance, the story must detail him enduring really harsh weather.
Okay, harsh weather. That seems maybe less directly spiritual.
Well, think about it. These weren't just, standard Hollywood inconveniences. The sources we looked at, site-specific, required stories about the weather. Things like descriptions of the near hypothermic cold in Italy during winter filming. Or, even more dramatically, the reports of Caviezel actually being struck by lightning on set.
Struck by lightning. Wow. Okay.
So by mandating these details, extreme, cold, life-threatening events like lightning, the story links that external physical struggle to a level of commitment that just kept going no matter what. It communicates that the suffering wasn't just in the script, it was kind of systemic to the whole process, almost mirroring the suffering being portrayed, you see.
Huh. I guess I'm still a little surprised that weather and, physical danger were specifically mandated for a narrative about faith. It sounds almost like a safety incident report.
Maybe. But perhaps it signals that for this faith narrative to work, it requires the actor's real life to mirror the character's suffering as closely as possible. It makes the faith element feel more earned, more credible.
That makes sense. The external suffering validates the internal response.
Precisely, and that leads directly into the third mandatory visual description, which really hits the spiritual core of the story, describing him praying between takes.
Okay. That feels like the key pivot, doesn't it? You describe the immense physical toll dragging the cross, the freezing cold, the danger, and then the narrative must show his private devotion.
Mm-hmm.
That's the explicit connection, right? Merging the actor's own intense personal faith, maybe his coping mechanism, with the huge public demands of the role. It gives the audience that crucial context. The man going through all that physical agony was also spiritually grounded. It makes the whole thing feel deeper, more resonant.
It absolutely acts as the necessary counterpoint. Think about it. Without specifically including the private prayer, all those intense visuals of suffering the cross, the weather, the injuries, they could just be read as, extreme professionalism or maybe intense method acting.
Right, just part of the job, however extreme.
Exactly. But by mandating the portrayal of private prayer, the story forces the audience to understand the suffering differently. It suggests it was met with, and maybe even processed through, a deep spiritual conviction. The story is basically constructed to make you believe the commitment was total, physical, spiritual, unwavering.
Okay, so we have these powerful visual elements, but there's sound, too. To really amplify all this visual and emotional weight, the story requirements specify an auditory element, too, using dramatic music cues, and specifically using them to enhance the emotional impact of these exact scenes we just talked about, the crops, the harsh weather, the private prayer.
Yeah, the music isn't just background noise here.
No, it feels like a tool for narrative emphasis.
Yeah.
Like the music is underlining the profound meaning of his commitment. It's like it's telling the audience, pay attention, this moment isn't just a description, it's significant, it's destiny, maybe.
Absolutely. The music is like the cinematic mortar holding the whole narrative structure together. If you just describe the actor praying between takes, okay, that description might land, it might not. But when you pair that description with a really sweeping, dramatic musical cue, suddenly the moment is elevated. It goes from being just a private action to feeling like a public spiritual declaration. It's a way to ensure that those key moments, the suffering and the devotion, are felt as deeply by the audience as they are understood intellectually.
Right. So we've covered the cinematic spectacle side of things, the intense visuals, the physical suffering, the soaring music. But this is a story about personal faith. It needs grounding, right? Something real, something you can actually point to. So the source material makes another absolute requirement. You have to quote real statements from his interviews. But I wonder about that. We've got these incredibly intense, dramatic elements already. Lightning strikes, sweeping music. Why mandate bringing in potentially dry interview quotes? Doesn't putting documented quotes right next to, manufactured drama risk, sort of, breaking the spell, breaking the suspension of disbelief?
That's a really good question, and it's crucial. But actually, I think it's the mandated quotes that save the narrative from feeling manufactured or manipulated.
How so?
Well, it comes down to validation.
Yeah.
And veracity, authenticity, again, the dramatic elements, the visuals, the music. They pull the heartstrings. They create the spectacle. But the mandated quotes, they serve to validate the whole personal faith angle of the story.
Okay.
Think of it like this. The cinematic stuff is the spectacle, sure. But the interview quotes, they're like the witness testimony in a trial. Without the actor's own documented words confirming the internal struggle, confirming that, yes, the physical suffering did translate into some kind of spiritual insight or change the story, could just drift.
Drift into just feeling like dramatic license, like maybe it was just good acting after all.
Exactly. It risks becoming purely fictional or just an interpretation. The quotes act as the anchor. They stop the narrative from floating away. They solidify all that emotional weight by rooting it in lived experience. They guarantee the audience gets proof of his internal life, straight from the source himself.
Huh. So the really effective story, according to this blueprint, has to operate on these two levels at once. They're distinct, but they have to be woven together. You've got the grand visible stage, the physical pain, the music, and then you've got the quiet documented proof of internal change from his own words.
Spot on. It's a synthesis of the spectacular and the factual, or at least the testimonial. Yeah, the blueprint for making this narrative succeed demands that constant, deliberate balance. You absolutely need the intense suffering visuals. You need the dramatic music to convey the scope and the stakes, make it feel big. But that spectacle has to be continually grounded by, tempered by, the undeniable authenticity you get from using his actual quotes from interviews. Getting that balance right, that's what transforms what could be just a simple behind-the-scenes story into something far more ambitious. A compelling account of spiritual metamorphosis. The story is basically designed to be simultaneously overwhelming and credible.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening? We've seen these specific non-negotiable parts needed to basically engineer this very compelling narrative. You need the highly charged visuals of suffering, you need the intimate glimpse of private prayer, you need the sweeping use of dramatic music, and crucially, you need that indispensable anchor of documented real-world quotes. This isn't about just letting the facts speak for themselves, not at all. It's about deliberately arranging those facts and arranging that spectacular drama to communicate one singular message: spiritual transformation.
Exactly. And that leads us to maybe a final thought for you to kind of mull over. When you consider this specific way of constructing the story, this very deliberate blend of highly dramatic, almost overwhelming cinematic techniques alongside a strict requirement for verifiable personal testimony, what effect do you think that deliberate merging of high drama and documented authenticity actually has on an audience's perception of, well, of the truth? When a story is explicitly designed, engineered to be both spiritual and deeply moving, does that design change how you assess the actor's actual experience? What stands out to you about this kind of blueprint for telling a story about faith?
Something to think about. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll catch you next time.